Hello everybody, this talk is called Reintroducing Apollo Client vSphere and Beyond. And actually later I noticed it should also be vSphere and Before, but we'll get there. Real quick, the team of Apollo Client currently consists of two people. That's Cheryl Miller and me. And if you're using Apollo Client, if you are in the issues, you probably saw one of us. Cheryl's handle is easy, it's Cheryl Miller. My handle is usually Franius and Fry, and I'm not going to tell you how I got there. And yeah, another title might have been Apollo Client for not too many new features. Because this is a Sember major, and flashy new features don't belong in Sember majors. Breaking features or breaking changes belong in Sember features, Sember releases. That said, this would be a very short talk if I would start with that and end with that. There's actually a lot that happened. Like 250 commits, each of those commits was a full pull request. It's a big release, and we took multiple weeks writing the change logs and the migration guide. So we're going to look at things that changed in Apollo Client 4 first. The first thing that changed, we refined what you already know, and yeah, that's what changed. The first thing is that we are more opinionated, and we're going to lead off with that. Clicker, please click. Yeah, there we are. The idea is that in the past we left users alone without patterns too much. We gave them a ton of tools, and they had a ton of different ways of using these tools, which not always led them to their success. So the idea now is we want to guide users more into that success. And one of those things you've seen here a lot, fragment co-location. You can do that with Apollo Client too, and if you touch your code base, you should move your code base into that direction. Another thing is that our hooks were severely overused for everything. If you want to fire off a request, but you're not interested in the result of that request, and if you don't want to synchronize the result of that request with your component, you shouldn't use a hook for that, because hooks are made to synchronize with your component. So instead of doing that, you probably should just use Apollo Client and call client.query instead of calling use lazy query execute and then ignoring the result, because if that result changes, it will re-render your component and you don't get anything from that. So we've been starting to flush those patterns out, deprecate things that made these patterns easier to get users to do something actually different. We also want to discourage a few more footguns. There was this pattern of using CodeGen to generate hooks, and then we added more hooks. So if you had one query, suddenly you had use album route query, use album route query lazy query, use album route query suspense query, use album route, I don't know what else, but you had a few. And what you could do instead is you create a typed document node, and then you just use that typed document node with any of those hooks directly. You don't generate a lot of code, and you still have the same level of type safety. And also in v4, you have more type safety now, because each of those hooks comes with like 5 to 10 overloads, which will change the types as you pass in different options. And if you created your own hooks, each of your created hooks would have to come with 5 to 10 overloads, and your code generation would always have to catch up with what we're generating, and that's just generally not a good thing to do. So please stop generating hooks. Please start just using type document node. It's been around for a very long time. We also removed the onCompleted and onError callbacks in the useQuery and useLazyQuery hooks, because those were also a footgun. Nobody could really explain to me when they should trigger, and if I got two different people to tell me, like in bug reports, it doesn't trigger here and it doesn't trigger there, like everybody told me a different story when they think would be the right moment in time when those hooks trigger. And that just shows that these callbacks shouldn't have existed from the start. I think I need to stand closer to this. The next thing that I highlight is that we get more modern. That starts with the fact that we are now ESM first. We are not ESM only because there's a lot of legacy applications out there, but the focus is definitely on our ESM bundles. We have added a package JSON exports field, we had ESM before, but you couldn't really use it without that exports field because most modern bundlers wanted you to have that. And it's something of those things you can't introduce within a major because it is a breaking change for some bundlers. So now we have that, and that is like a lot of extra handling, but it's on our side and doesn't make your side more difficult. We are starting with a modern build target, and actually we added this Apollo client versioning policy that allows us to define when we're not following Semver, because Semver is not made for like really having a good grasp on how you handle your dependencies. We say we will update to supported versions of Node, and we won't support Node 12 just because we haven't released a new major while Node 12 has been dropped 5 years ago. We only will do those changes in minors, but if this is important to you, please read the versioning policy where we point out what we can do when. It will also always be in release notes. We switched from Zen-Observable, which was the observable solution we initially added, to RxJS because that has obviously won between those libraries. We follow the new GraphQL over HTTP spec, which means there's more status codes than 200. And we have a significantly smaller bundle size now. And on top of that, we are also more modular, so you don't even need to pull everything into the bundle if you don't use it. The next thing we really looked for is a better developer experience. That starts usually with TypeScript. So for example, if you have variables in your query and you have non-optional variables, before you could still just not pass in options and thus not pass in variables. Now this is very strictly typed. If you have optional variables, you don't need options, you don't need variables. As soon as you have one non-optional variable, you are required to pass them in. And you will get that on TypeScript level. We added a new data state property because before we didn't have a really good way of showing you if the data you had was complete or in a deferred/streaming state, or if it was partial. Like you could puzzle that together, but it has no TypeScript story behind it. And now if you check that, you will get your types adjusted depending on the data state you're in. We have changed a lot of our types. So here on the left, you see the old type name, and here on the right, you see that we moved them into namespaces. So the lazy query hook options are useLazyQuery.options. It's much easier now if you need one of those types to find them, because you just use like the Apollo client dot and you get all the types for Apollo client. You do useQuery dot and you get all the types for useQuery. It's very obvious where something comes from now. We cleaned up generics. This is going to hurt a few people, but we had like stuff that was T-data, T-variables, and we had stuff that was T-variables, T-data. Now it's always T-data, T-variables, except in like the old type names that we keep around for a while before we remove them. We did a lot of documentation writing. In fact, we spent like, I think, 8 weeks writing purely documentation. And that means that almost every function now has a doc block with an example, with more explanation. We added tons of API pages. Like this is like just a little part of the big branch merge pull request. Each of those is a documentation page. It's massive what happened there. And we still have a lot to do, but it's a good start. Another thing is that people always had problems using Apollo client outside of React, because the main bundle exported the useQuery hook, which pulled in the React package. And now you don't need to do that anymore. Like before, people had to use Apollo client/core Now they just use Apollo Client, and if you are using a React, you use Apollo Client/React for that. Yeah, that's what I just said. But we did some more. We also reworked error handling. That was always a bit weird. We wrapped all incoming errors from unknown sources in an Apollo error, and then you could access like 20 different properties on that, depending if it's a network error or something else. Right now, we pass through external errors. We have our own very descriptive errors for what it is. And we are not forcing you to do instance of, because we know how easy that breaks. Instead, you can do error name.is in accordance to error.is, which has recently been added to the spec. We reworked subscription handling. I already said we introduced RxJS. Observable query instances could hog up memory before, which is not really easy anymore. Notify network status change to true, which means in Angular you will get an immediate loading state and instead of having to like set that yourself. So lots of stuff there. We unified links. Before we had some links that were classes, some links that were created by function calls that then created a class. Now everything is a class. You always use the new keyword. It's much more unified. And then there's the part where we think about the future. Apollo Client 3 has been around for a very long time. And we couldn't change things that we wanted to change because it meant we had to do a major. And when we were to do a major, people will come to us and ask, why aren't you also including that in the major? So it just piled up. We don't want to have that experience again. So things now get a lot more pluggable. Yeah, but also we rewrote tons of stuff that you probably won't notice and hopefully won't notice. We added opt-in features. If you're not using something, you don't need to bundle it. So instead of passing an URI or a resolver to the Apollo client options, you now have to pass in an HTTP link to the Apollo client options that would otherwise have been implicitly bundled. This reduces bundle size by a lot. And that's the point I wanted to come to, is we enable experimentation. So now we are not locked into the defer from GraphQL Alpha 2 anymore, but you can pass in the defer handler for the defer version your server uses, and we don't force that upon you as we did before. We also know that the ecosystem around us is evolving, so we added overridable types. If you use one code gen and that interfaces with our types in some way, you can override some of our internal types. You've seen that data state completed, data state streaming. That might be embedded in generated types in different ways depending on which code gen you use. And now your code gen can tell Apollo client how to actually get it out of that embedded state. Then there's a little bit of actually new things, but they were added in Apollo Client 3. I want to put these things here because they oftentimes were missed and they are ongoing efforts. They are overarching. We started in 3, we do them in 4, we will probably still continue preaching them in 5. So the first ongoing effort is the topic of the conference. We are embracing fragments. And here I'm going to show the fragment story. Apollo client, as long as I can remember, and that's like at least 5 years, always had client read fragment and client write fragment. And this was more meant for cache modification than actual usage in a running application. In Apollo Client 3.7, we went into the direction of fragment collocation by introducing a fragment registry where you could now register fragments and introducing a use fragment hook. We built upon that by adding the non-reactive directive that you could put on a fragment spread, and then you would still get that data out of the hook, but the hook wouldn't re-render your page anymore if that interface changed, which was like the first step to data masking. Then we added use suspense fragment. You will always see like we start with a pretty simple application that re-renders a lot. We still have a lot of manual handling down here, and we move to the future. So we add non-reactive, and now we move from use fragment to use suspense fragment, which moves the loading state handling and the error state handling out of this component. And for the first time, this component actually fits on the slide. Then we added data masking, and at that point, the non-reactives go away again. The data is just not available to this component unless you explicitly say to unmask a specific fragment, but that's more of a migration story, so I'm not showing it here. What data masking actually does is that you really only get the stuff in your query that's written out and not the stuff that's in fragments. If you want to have the fragment contents, you need to use fragment to access them. Another API that we added, going back to the we're not React-only part, was a client watch fragment, which is essentially what you would use to implement a use fragment or a use suspense fragment or whatever matching API you have in your framework. Another ongoing effort we have is adopting suspense, but I'm not going to talk about adopting suspense because that's a whole talk on its own and you can't just watch that talk and take more out of it. So I've just linked it on the slides. All the slides are online, by the way. I know it's a little bit fast and it's hard to follow if you always look at the source code. So just look at the slides later online if this is getting too fast for you. So skipping that, we worked a lot on framework integration patterns because things in React move in many different ways. One way that was added was loaders. And that's essentially like this is an example from 10-stack start. We have a route, and that route takes something out of search. It passes it into a loader. The loader does a preload query, creates a query ref, and that query ref actually comes from the server to the client. And at some point is read by useReadQuery, which will suspend the component until the data has actually arrived. Another pattern that we added is preloading in React Server components, which you do by kind of a similar thing. Like you have a preload query component, that's a React Server component, that gives you a query ref, and then you pass the query ref down until it hits a client component, gets streamed into your client component SSR and into your client component browser run. And there you can access it by using the query ref related hooks, use query ref handler for stuff like refetch, and use read query for actually reading the data from the query ref. Of course, there's like that one more thing that people were hoping for, and that's like using suspense only in the browser, and it magically works on the server. So if I have a use suspense query hook call in my client component, we actually have an implementation for transparently transporting that stuff over. So if you use suspense query, it server-side renders that actually streams all the data that's received during that render over to the browser where it simulates a network request instead of actually doing one and giving you the exact same data with the exact same timing it had on the server. So that will eliminate most hydration errors. This is like also the most compatible thing that we have. It works in Next.js, it works in 10-stack start, it works in Redwood.js, and it also works in like custom Vite setups. And not to forget, we are still not only a React-only library, and we need to embrace that more. This is the pull request that Gerald just did against Apollo Angular. We are talking with the community, we are collaborating with other projects, and like here, he did a PR to add Apollo Client 4 compatibility to Apollo Angular. They are still flashing that out, but it's getting somewhere. Another ongoing effort is that we are working on tooling. And that, again, means multiple things. For one, it's the dev tools, which, when they worked, were amazing. When they didn't, were frustrating. We have a new protocol for client discovery, which hopefully means that your Apollo client will be turning up in the dev tools, even if things are with a bit of a weird timing. They are way more stable now. We support more than one Apollo client instance via that little drop-down up there. And we added a new memoization cache panel, which lets you look at like how all your memoization caches are overflowing. This is not necessarily your resource usage, but it will give you a very good indicator if you're on a page that has, I don't know, 800 useQuery hooks. That will show you you're doing something wrong. You can change the defaults that you see here, but probably you shouldn't, but you should change your page to fit into the defaults, because they are very generous. The other thing is that we put a significant effort into working with the Apollo GraphQL VS Code extension. So there was a whole under-the-hood modernization, updating dependencies, supporting ESM, etc., last year. And we also added the ability to, right now still experimentally, use the web browser dev tools that you just saw, but in your IDE. And that's not very useful for web developers. But if you're doing React Native, this is a godsend, because before that just wasn't possible. So where are we going with all of this? AI is coming. I think someone said that already. The idea is mainly, if we help humans write code, AI will also be better at writing code. So one big thing is, again, fragment co-location. If a whole component fits on this page, it also fits into the context of your AI code writing helper thingy. More docs improvements. If the docs help a human understand the whole thing, they also help an AI understand the whole thing. And on every of our doc pages, you can also go to this little drop down here and either copy the page as Markdown, which is much nicer to read for an AI than like all of this HTML here, or directly open it in ChatGPT or Claude and ask questions if you don't want to read the whole thing. Another idea that I'm gonna admit we probably might swipe, but we don't know how yet, is maybe adding a dev MCP. This is something like this screenshot is from the React repository. They are experimenting on an MCP for doing stuff like profiling and performance optimizations. We will see what it turns out like, but we want to try getting something that helps developers that use AI get better results from that AI and have less frustration with it. Another interesting idea is that maybe you don't want a server or you don't have it yet, you just want to mock components or you just want to mock a whole application and just have AI fill in the gaps of whatever your query just did. So we haven't merged it yet, but we are in the process of merging that. There will be a link that will allow you to just plug in an AI, and then you don't have a server, but an AI will give you fake data, which is nice, but before you have even a query, it might help you explore which data you actually need and where to get it from. Then there's like the big blank slide. We will be integrating with agentic use cases. It's a big question mark for me personally, because there's so much to understand. But I know that in many cases there is going to be a synchronization step of data between the agentic AI and the UI you see on the screen. And that's actually not too far removed from what we saw with supporting React Server components. Suddenly your client is running not on one machine, but on, like in the case of the React Server component, on 3 machines. On the machine rendering the React Server component, on the machine rendering the streaming SSR, and in the browser. And all three of those might be running at the same time, so you get into synchronization problems. I think we can take some of those ideas to get a little bit of a head start, but I can't really tell you where it will be going. Another thing is we will be embracing CodeGen more, because right now the recommendation was use CodeGen. By the way, there's like 10 different CodeGens and 200 different configurations. Use whatever fits your project. This is incredibly flexible and not the best idea for everyone. So for one, yes, we will support more than one CodeGen. That's why we added those overridable types. And we are shipping the types for GraphQL CodeGen, but there's also GQL Tada, which will be able to do the same thing and like inject their type overrides. And we also look into adding our own CodeGen preset, because that just allows us to better align the code that's generated with the features we want to add in the future. The other thing is experimentation. I say that with regret, we have stalled the ecosystem a bit, because if there's a new spec feature and there's no client to try that spec feature is very unlikely to get merged because nobody has experiences with it. We can't add every non-stable feature to Apollo client. But what we did here with incremental handler is that you choose your alpha. And if we do things this way, we can give you the idea of adopting features. We don't force the bundle size on everybody, and we aren't locked in until the spec is locked in, and then we can maybe set a default. We are in the process of adding support for stream and defer with GraphQL 17 Alpha 9. That means the PR for defer was opened last week. Like the screenshots are from today, and actually entered the review phase, which I'm not doing because I'm here, this Monday. And this is like the stream PR that's from 10 hours ago when I made the screenshot, so it's from yesterday. We will look into adding fragment argument support soon, because in my eyes, that's the last big piece we are missing in the fragment co-location story. And we are also keeping an eye on semantic nullability. The nice thing is, if we go the route of experiments, we can have any number of those. And if something actually doesn't make it in a spec, well, we can drop it next major, and until then, nobody has to ship it in their apps. Yeah, upgrade. You can update to Apollo Client 3.14, which is probably the most annoying release we've ever done, because it doesn't add a single feature. It fixes 2 bugs, but it adds about 50 different console logs that tell you what to migrate and how to do that. But it brings you to the best place of migrating to Apollo Client 4. So you update, you fix all the TypeScript warnings, you fix all the warnings in your console, then you update to 4.0, then you execute the code mod, which will rewrite almost all of your imports and a few other things, and then you follow the migration guide. And I hope at that point, apart from the fact that errors are now handled differently, which is amazing for the future and horrible for everyone who has to migrate, and I'm really sorry for that, you will have a good experience with this, and you will like your code base much more after you did this. In general, we need your feedback. We couldn't have identified the things that hurt people the most if they wouldn't have been complaining. So if something sucks, please tell us. If something is great, it might be nice to hear that too. But either way, if you open an issue, that's the best place to get started with us, and then we'll start communicating. We really try to be ahead on our issues, and we got our issue number with a release where we could close a lot of things almost down to 400 open issues now. So yeah, we got 32 seconds for a Q&A. Any questions? But I'll be here after too. You can also ask in private or in secret, or yeah. We have a forum too, yeah. Questions are more a forum things. Things that seem so weird that you think it's a bug are more an issue thing. So, but worst case, we point you the other direction and answer you anyways. Okay, then have a nice day, everybody.